I'm delighted to introduce you all to Matt. Matt Hazledine is the founder of Lymph United, a really successful enterprise that I know he'll tell you a little bit more about, that I'm delighted to work closely with him. And as a man with lymphedema, he is here today to give us his perception of living with lymphedema. And given what Gary has just shared with us, Matt, this is a really brave thing to do, to come and speak to everyone about your experiences and your feelings and emotions. And so thank you so very, very much for doing that. If you would like to take us through your journey a little bit, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Gary, every slide, every bullet point resonated. I was sitting here nodding away, scribbling notes. So congratulations. And I was honoured and delighted to be part of that study, and applaud the work that you do for what is essentially the silent voice within the community. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to raise my voice alongside Gary in this environment. And as Becky said, I have lymphedema. I was diagnosed after cellulitis in 2011, which hospitalized me for 2 weeks. And going back to, again, some of this is going to sound familiar with Gary's slides, but the delivery of the vascular surgeon at the time, after 2 weeks of cellulitis, which was with sepsis, talking about amputation, very scary conversations separate to the pain and the delirium that went with it, was the final day in hospital, the vascular surgeon coming up to me and saying, right, you got lymphedema, it's incurable, you've got it for life, pick up some stockings on the way out. And that was it. You know, at the age of 40, new business, young family, 2 weeks in hospital with immense pain, not knowing whether I'd pull through this condition. To have that delivery was pretty hard hitting. And it fell upon, and I won't take any credit for this, it fell upon my wife, bless her, to research what lymphedema was, because my head just went straight into the sand at that point. I went into my cave, feeling sorry for myself, wouldn't accept help. As Gary's slides intimated, I distanced myself from the real world that I was quite confident in living. We had the responsibility to research what lymphedema was or is, and how and where to find help. And it's a lonely journey. And it took 4 years for me to accept. I think the key word Gary mentioned earlier on was acceptance. Accept the condition and decide to do something positive with it. Ordinarily in my life, I'm quite a positive person, but that did knock me for 6 during the initial period of diagnosis. And I know that is not a common, that is a common situation post-diagnosis, that people feel abandoned, isolated, alone. And there are communities out there to support people with lymphedema, which is why I created Lymphedema United. But there are other support groups out there online and with the LSN. But as was touched on before we came on call, this is quite a female-dominated sector. And I decided, because I'm the gobby one, to put my head above the parapet and see what I could do to represent the male voice and try and bring people together, especially get men talking about their condition, because as a group we're stronger. And as a result, you know, what are we now? Nearly 5 years in, we've made some great friendships up and down the country, with men, with women, and across the world, which is fantastic. So that's a great achievement. But the diagnosis side, if anything can be learned from that, it's to soften the diagnosis, and also explain where you can find help, where your patient can find help, signpost them to trusted sites, to the BLS, the LSN, to Legs Matter, to Lymph United, rather than, to pick up on Gary's point, Googling, which is scary territory, and you can get a lot of misinformation there. So if there are many healthcare professionals listening, please, if you do either deliver that diagnosis or are providing a clinical service, make sure you signpost them to the right sources to find a community that can support them in a positive way and not just be a moaning platform, which some can be.
Thank you, Matt. You are very brave and very eloquent to explain how you felt. And like you said, you were so young. And Gary, that was a real thing from your presentation as well, was about the ages. You had across the board of the gentleman that you were speaking with. The question that we'd had was, what are the signs and symptoms at an early stage? And I think that's really key here, because we are talking about people who may not ask for help at that early stage. So what is it that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, I know. I mean, the categorization of lymphedema always means that you've got a kind of subclinical stage whereby there might be not the things that you see. I think it's that notion when it starts to move on that we start to say, actually, people are noticing that my legs are swelling more than it ever did before, in terms of notice that it might be in one leg rather than two. With that side of things, does it feel more achy than normal? Especially if they haven't been doing any exercise or sport in between, when you kind of could go, actually, it's nothing to do with the simple fact of me engaging in sport, a bit achy afterwards. And also it's the fact that it's consistent, that you're starting to see it on a more regular basis. Now, that's why I said here that people kind of give excuses for it. They go, actually, oh, it's all because I did X, Y, and Z. The difference there is it being a consistent thing that actually I can't give it more reasons as to why it's not occurring because of that. So definitely the swelling, definitely some of the aching that they might be experiencing. Of course, what we want to avoid is the fact of any cellulitis, especially in that early stages. So if people like Matt as an instance, and some of the men, the first thing they ever had as their first sign and symptom was the cellulitis for them. Might have had the swelling, but they don't remember that. All they remember was the cellulitis. So some of that is about the redness, the swelling, the heat, the pain, the creeping up the leg that they notice, especially whereby you don't want them to say have red legs or lower limb inflammation that usually comes a bit later. It's that cellulitis. Now, if we capture that in the early stages, that's brilliant. If we get them treatment, they don't need to go into hospital. Essential part of this is, let's notice the swelling, let's notice the ache, let's deal with infections as soon as possible, and that way we can return them back to hopefully maintaining where they are now as part of that risk reduction and management.
Thank you, Gary. Coming on from that, for both of you really, is there anything specific from a male perspective around treatment? So we think of lymphedema treatment as being skincare, exercise, positioning, elevation, compression. And is there anything, we've talked about the language that we use, so being careful about the choice of language, but are there specifics that differ in the management strategies of lymphedema for men than women?
Okay. Matt, would you like to go first? Because I think it'd be interesting from your perspective, and then I can feed off that, if that's all right.
Of course. I think language is very important, Becky. Gary touched on the word stockings. Initially that came as a bit of a shock that I, at the age of 40, would have to be wearing stockings. I think if it had been reframed as maybe compression garments or compression socks, then that would have made it more palatable. I've got used to it now. They're called a variety of things, but I think it's based on each individual. And I think, there are the new men out there, and then there are the traditional male men. And you have to perhaps tailor the language to the individual person that you're seeing. And I think that goes back to things like exercise. A lot of men that you might see are already fit and active, and exercise is just a normal thing that they would do on a daily basis. But sadly, there are some people that have much heavier limbs that struggle with the word exercise. They see it as a huge mountain to climb, and therefore by breaking that down to gentle movement or regular movement and explain why that's important to the lymphatic system, dispels that myth, oh, I've got to go and do a 3-mile run or 50 press ups or whatever it happens to be. Actually, it can be as simple as we know of just doing some pumps with your stress ball or some heel raises while you're waiting for the catheter ball. Whatever it may be, it's breaking that down to the individual person that you're seeing. So just picking up on compression and the healthy lifestyle elements of the 4 cornerstones. I think that's how I and many other men I've spoken to would perhaps prefer to be addressed.
Thanks, Matt. Gary, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's great to feed off what Matt said there. It's that notion of words and reframing things. Skincare, as an example. Now, younger men, when we talk about, say, below 30 as an example, will probably look after their skin more than men perhaps over 50 in terms of they've been so exposed to social media as an example in different ways of saying looking after your skin's great because you can maintain a certain appearance, a look, stay younger as an example that comes to play. And we've got that difference. Older men may not have been exposed to that, let alone skincare. And what does that mean? Also, they probably perhaps would have associated that with their wife or partner as an example, engaging in that. And it might be that it's a terminology. Actually, the skincare that we're talking about is to increase the strength of your skin, to withstand infections, to keep you going. It's the words strength, strong coming into play. Men like me in their 40s, I was kind of in that in-between era of looking after your skin, which was, I can't remember what they called it, the terminology, the new man, whatever it was. But with that, I looked after my skin from the age of 15. Moisturizers, using women's moisturizers, because there was no men's products. Now there are men's products aimed at them. It's a bit like exercise there. It's about saying to people, you can still engage in things, but it's about that notion of actually, if you engage a bit too much in your gym work or your run, etc., you're going to have a bit of an increase. But you know that as long as they've got the skills to manage it. So suddenly you're going, actually, I'm giving you back control. I know it's going to get a bit bigger, but here you go. Here's an extra layer here, or you do this. Compression therapy is to say terminology. Instead of hosiery and stuff, it's perhaps just talking about the socks that they wear. MLD, SLD might be perceived as massage, but you might say, actually, you know what? You're looking after yourself so that you can withstand things. Treat it as that rest period for you to contemplate, come back together stronger. And again, I think it's just about that terminology as an example, but not all men see it in the same way. That's why I say we're a group within a group, and certain things work and certain things don't. It's just about engaging with that person.
I agree, Gary. And if I can just jump in there very quickly, Becky, with regards to skincare, you're absolutely right. And if we are explained, sorry, let me rephrase that. If it is explained to us why it's important to wear the compression, to look after our skin, to avoid the cellulitis, the infections, if we understand why, I think that breaks down the barriers. So in addition to the language, it's the, if you don't, this is what could happen. And we don't want that, do we? So it shifts the responsibility to the patient thereafter the clinic appointment to maintain that self-management for the 6 months until the next appointment.
Oh, thank you both. There's some really top tips to take away there. I know for some of the guys that I've treated in the past as well, they've quite liked to spray moisturizer and are quite used to sprays with deodorants and stuff. And also just about that smoothing down of the hair if they've got extremely hairy limbs, that just smoothing that hair down to avoid any folliculitis, so little pustules at the base of the hair, that if you have a predisposition to infection, you've got to be like sort of super careful.